Prayers.
Almighty God, by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom and understanding, we, thine unworthy servants here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations. And grant that, we having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy beloved blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Just wish to take the opportunity before we begin the day to welcome you all back. To welcome you all back as this Honourable Senate resumes its sittings. We had a bit of a enforced break, as it were, and I hope that you all use the opportunity to refresh and recharge, and that you all had a very pleasant Easter. The position in relation to COVID protocols have received some adjustment outside of the Parliament. I wish to inform, however, that within the confines of the chamber, members will be required to continue to wear their masks unless they are speaking. That is being done specifically because of the particular airflow or lack thereof of the chamber. As far as the President is concerned, whether it is myself or someone else sitting here, because of the social distancing and the fact that there is some distance between us, the mask will not be required on a continuous basis, but ought to be worn, Senator Sinclair, if you are here for any considerable period of time. So that is the decision that I have taken along with the clerk and the leaders of opposition and government business. I have consulted with them. Before we begin, just bring to your attention that Senator Rodriguez Campbell has been invited by the Commonwealth Secretariat to attend and moderate a panel session at their Leadership for Good Governance and Social Transformation in the Caribbean, and this workshop is in Barbados. The Senator will moderate a panel entitled Good Governance and Transformational Leadership. So best of luck to you, Madam. I'm happy to announce that both Member of Parliament Tamika Davis and our own Senator Gabriel Morris will also be in attendance at the workshop slated for April 25 to 27, 2022. So good luck to you both. And just before we begin, I remind Senator Samuda that he can address me from a seat other than his own, and bring to his attention that old Jamaican adage that one day busher are still busher. So, Leader, we are recognizing you. Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following. Ministry Paper number 26 of 2022 and Annual Report of the Betting, Gaming and Lotteries Commission for the years 2017, 2018 and 2018, 2019. Ministry Papers, paper numbers 27, 28, 29, 30, 31 and 32 in respect of the law reform zones of special operations, special security and community development measures, the Denham Town Community Zone Social Intervention dated April 13, 2022, the Norwood Community Zone Social Intervention dated April 13, 2022, the Mount Salem Community Zone Social Intervention dated September 1, 2017 to April 13, 2022, the Parade Gardens Zone Social Intervention dated April 13, 2022, the Savannah Lamar Community Zone Social Intervention dated April 13, 2022, and the Greenwich Town Zone Social Intervention dated April 13, 2022. Also, the Augustown Community Zone Social Intervention dated April 13, 2022, respectively, along with their attendant orders and resolutions. The Nsinga King report dated April 5, 2022. Annual reports and audited financial statements with regards to 1. The Ultimate Tire Company Limited for the year 2017, 2018. The Maritime Authority of Jamaica for the year 2018, 2019. The Jamaica Civil Aviation Authority for the year 2019, 2020. The Maritime Authority of Jamaica for the year 2017, 2018. And the Aeronautical Telecommunications Limited for the year 2019, 2020. The University of the West Indies Mona Campus Principal's Annual Report for the years 2019, 2020, and 2020, 2021. Annual reports for E-Learning Jamaica Limited for the year 2020, 2021. The Montego Bay Convention Center for the year 2018, 2019. The Anti-Dumping and Subsidies Commission for the year 2016, 2017. The Court of Appeal of Jamaica for the year 2021, the Postal Corporation of Jamaica Limited for the years 2019, 2020, 2020, 2021, Petrojam Limited for the year 2021, and eGov Jamaica Limited for the year 2020, 2021. The Auditor General's Department certified Statement J, Statement of Receipts and Payments of the Contingency Funds of the Accountant General's Department for the years 2019, 2020, and 2020, 2021. The Integrity Commission Special Report of Investigations conducted failure to file statutory declarations with the Commission regarding the following persons from Sarah: Dr. Sean Parkinson and Dr. Sonji Reed. The Integrity Commission report of investigation conducted into allegations of impropriety, irregularities, and conflicts of interest in the award of contract for the exercise of painting works at the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management. The Trust and Corporate Services Providers Licensing and Operations Regulations 2022 and its resolution. The Public Procurement Amendment of First Schedule Order 2022 and its resolution. And the Auditor General's Department Certified Appropriation Account for Head 2624 from the Department of Correctional Services for the year 2014-2015.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Bills brought from the Honourable House of Representatives. Petitions, papers, Reports from committees. Notices of motions given orally.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice at the next meeting of the Senate I will move the following. Be it resolved with reference to the resolution approved by this Honourable Senate on the 15th day of January 2021, appointing a special select committee to jointly sit with a similar committee appointed by the House of Representatives to conduct the statutory review of the Cybercrimes Act, that the name Shireen Golding Campbell be added thereto. Mr. President, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
That Shireen with 2 E's? Okay. Anything else, Minister?
Yes. Mr. President, I beg to give notice at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the Public Procurement Act, the Public Procurement Amendment to First Schedule Order 2022 Resolution. Mr. President, where's the resolution? Whereas Section 4.1 of the Public Procurement Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, provides that the methods of procurement and procurement process set out in Parts 3 and 5, respectively, of the Act do not apply to any public procurement specified in the first schedule. And whereas, by virtue of Section 4.2 of the Act, the Minister may, by order, subject to affirmative resolution, amend the first schedule to the Act. And whereas, on the 22nd day of April, the Minister made the on the 12th day of April, 2022, the Minister made the Public Procurement Amendment First Schedule Order 2022, and whereas it is desirable that the Public Procurement Amendment of the First Schedule Order 2022 be affirmed, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. This resolution may be cited as a Public Procurement Amendment of First Schedule Order 2022 resolution, and 2, the Public Procurement Amendment of First Schedule Order 2022, which was laid on the table of the House on the 22nd day of April 2022, is affirmed. Mr. President, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion. Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the Trust and Corporate Services Providers Act, the Trust Corporate Services Providers Licensing and Operations Regulations 2022. Whereas, subsection 1 of subsection 47 of the Trust and Corporate Services Providers Act, hereinafter referred to as the Act, provide that the Commission may, with the approval of the Minister, make regulations providing for such matters as may be necessary or expedient for the purposes of the Act. And whereas subsection 2 of 47 of the Act provides regulations made under subsection 1 of the section shall be subject to affirmative resolution. And whereas the Commission, with the approval of the Minister responsible for Finance on the 24th day of March 2022, made the Trust and Corporate Services Providers Licensing and Operations Regulations 2022, and whereas it is desirable that the Trust and Corporate Services Providers Licensing and Operations Regulations 2022 be affirmed, now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. This resolution may be cited as the Trust and Corporate Services Providers Licensing and Operations Regulations 2022 resolution, and 2, the Trust and Corporate Services Providers Licensing and Operations Regulations 2022 is hereby affirmed. Mr. President, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Thank you very much, Minister. Questions and answers to questions? Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice? Motions relating to the sitting of the Senate? Motions for leave to introduce bills? The presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained? Public business?
Thank you. Mr. President, it is the intention to take the matter related to the Cybercrimes Act first, followed by the Procurement Act matter, and finally the trust matter. Mr. President, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Members would have heard the question. Those in favor?
Just a clarification. Is Senator Golden or Campbell a replacement? Because it's not clear to me.
No, it is an addition. It is an addition to the Joint Select Committee.
So that the government will be adding to the number of senators.
Correct.
Has that been extended to the opposition?
I extended it admittedly late to leader of opposition business before the start of the sitting.
That is correct, although it was a late courtesy. But that cybercrimes Joint Select Committee is actually on its final stages, wrapping up. So I didn't see the necessity of adding an opposition member.
Thank you. That's clear, Senator Brown. Minister Samuda.
Mr. President, I now move that the motion, notice of which I gave earlier, be approved.
So first of all, the question is that this standing order be suspended to enable you to take the motion. Those in favor? Against? And secondly, the question is, as moved by the Minister, that the motion be approved. Those in favor? Against? So ordered. Minister.
I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier. And this is related to the Public Procurement Amendment First Schedule Order 2022 resolution.
Yes, those in favor? Against? Go ahead, Minister.
Mr. President, I wish to start by acknowledging the opposition for the collaborative approach related to which allowed us to both table and take these two matters today. They are simple matters and non-contentious, but are indeed time sensitive. Mr. President, I stand here today to table and ask for the affirmation of the Public Procurement Amendment of the First Schedule Order 2022. This order was made pursuant to the powers conferred on the Minister of Finance under Section 4.2 of the Public Procurement Act. Mr. President, the Public Procurement Act, which was passed in 2015, amended in 2018, was brought into effect by appointed day notice on April 1, 2019. With the coming into effect of the Act, the Public Procurement Regulations and Public Procurement Review and Reconsideration Regulations, which were affirmed by both Houses of Parliament, were also brought into effect. As members are aware, the Act is aimed at strengthening the Government of Jamaica's public procurement system. It is implemented to, inter alia, to obtain value for money in public procurement, promote integrity, and engender public confidence in the public procurement process. Section 4.1 and 2 of the Act provide that the Minister may, by order, subject to affirmative resolution, amend the first schedule of the Act. The amendment of the first schedule allows for the non-application of the methods of procurement and the procurement process as set out in Parts 3 and 5 of the Act to any specified procurement. The specified procurement is the GOJ's procurement of financial advisor services in respect of road development projects in Jamaica from the International Finance Corporation through the Ministry of Finance and Public Service. Mr. President, this procurement is necessary given the GOJ acting through NROC has identified the need for the expansion and improvement and maintenance of the following road segments. 1, Miami Bay to Salem, which is approximately 12.3 kilometers of flat terrain. Sea Castles to Greenwood, comprising 6.8 kilometers of flat terrain. and Greenwood to Discover Bay, comprising 40.7 kilometers of undulating terrain. These road segments form part of the North Coastal Highway, and their current levels of service, which is a mechanism for determining how well a transportation facility is operating from a traveler's perspective, is poor. That is, these are Loss D roads, and expected Loss D is approximately 13,000 vehicles per day, whereas the current traffic on these road segments is approximately 23,000 vehicles per day, almost double the expectation. This expansion of the road segments is therefore expected to reduce the time taken for motorists to traverse the corridor, thereby supporting and improving access to places of attraction along the corridor, as well as supporting other developments, both residential and tourism related, that are programmed for the corridor. In assessing the financial viability of the project, the Government of Jamaica, through the Ministry of Finance and Public Service, sought the opinion and advice of IFC, a long-standing bilateral and international partner of GOJ. The IFC is a member of the World Bank Group, whose mandate is to support the World Bank's group twin goals of ending extreme poverty and boosting shared prosperity. To this end, the IFC mobilizes investors, creates new markets, and advises businesses and governments on private investments and connected matters. The IFC provided its initial advice on a pro bono basis. Mr. President, given the IFC's access to grant financing and the positive relationship between the GOJ and the IFC, and on the basis of the IFC's demonstrable expertise and experience in the conceptualization, financing, and implementation of major infrastructure development projects through public-private partnerships, it is necessary and sensible for the GOJ to continue the development of these projects with the IFC by way of a financial advisory services agreement for the structuring and tendering of the road projects. Upon consideration of the methods in the Act by which the GOJ could directly contract with the IFC, the single source procurement method pursuant to Section 25 is not applicable, as there are not sufficient background facts in support of any of the grounds appearing in Section 25(1)(a) to (e). This procurement, as facilitated by the order, would essentially operationalize three objects of the Public Procurement Act, namely A, maximization of economy and efficiency in public procurement, B, promotion of economic development through public procurement, and C, obtaining value for money in public procurement. Mr. President, in the first phase, the IFC will conduct due diligence and transaction structuring, which would involve specific inquiry into legal and regulatory issues, environmental and social considerations, including land acquisition, resettlement, financial analysis, and assessment, along with stakeholder engagement through public relations and communication. In the second phase, IFC will lead the tendering of the PPP, and the activities in this phase will include investor promotion, bidder pre-qualification, solicitation of offers, contract negotiations, preparation of contract, and tender award and closing. Mr. President, I wish to emphasize that we are pursuing this modality of effecting an order to ensure that we uphold the necessary parliamentary oversight to exempt the IFC from the procurement process for the critical groundwork, the advisory and conceptualization, etc. Mr. President, this approach now being taken by the government is unlike any other that has been taken before for the procurement of major infrastructure development works. In the past, Mr. President, we developed our major infrastructure projects by way of funding from our bilateral partners. These agreements for funding typically left us with no choice regarding the selection of contractors. In this instance, these projects will be entirely GOJ funded, and so with the advice and involvement of the IFC, in accordance with the GOJ public procurement laws, we will deploy competitive methods of procurement to engage suitably qualified contractors to undertake these projects. Mr. President, the order before us has two paragraphs. Paragraph 1 provides an introduction of the order, the first schedule, and the section of the Public Procurement Act which grant the Minister the enabling powers. Paragraph 2 addresses the insertion of a new paragraph, P, to allow for the exclusion of the financial advisory services procured from the International Finance Corporation in respect of the road development projects in Jamaica from procurement procedures established under the Act. Mr. President, with this order, the government intends to facilitate the GOJ's current ambitions to provide a seamless approach for future similar financial advisory services agreements for the contemplated road developments. Mr. President, I now invite members of the Honourable Senate to support the affirmation of this order.
Thank you very much, Senator Minister Samuda. Senator Bunting.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I just want to make a short intervention to point out two things. The first is that the acting leader of government business will note that the opposition is quite happy to cooperate to facilitate in passing matters like these, which are not controversial, even though they may not strictly follow the process outlined in the standing orders, because we're not being difficult for the sake of being difficult when we have more substantive matters that we believe necessitates proper research and preparation for the debates. The second thing I would point out is that we do support this initiative. And it is interesting because not too long ago, when the matter of the Mobe bypass came up, we were making the exact same points that Minister Clark made last month when he introduced this topic. And the fact that we were no longer in the position of being mendicants when it came to financing our infrastructure projects, because the fiscal reforms that we had observed over two administrations put us in a favorable position of being able to finance our own infrastructure projects. And therefore, it was, it was unfortunate that notwithstanding us being in that position, we were still following the same behavior that did not guarantee or did not contribute to us getting the best prices, which is what generally comes from competitive tendering. However, better late than never, Mr. President. And we support this move. As far back as 30 years ago, when I was involved in privatization in the early 90s, we had in the ministry paper identified that when it came to procurement of professional services, it was often difficult to find apples to compare with apples. There would always be cases where certain institutions, such as the IFC, because of their unique position, would have overwhelming competence in particular professional areas. And therefore, it wasn't always useful to try and put out a tender for these types of very specialized services when there may only be one or two providers who would meet the criteria. And even if you had someone else that bid, certainly selection on the basis of price might not be the most appropriate. So I welcome this move to recognize that we are now in a stronger position as a government for procurement. It's as a result of sacrifices by workers, by bondholders, by the entire society, truthfully, since 2013, to ensure that we are now in a position where we are not just takers of whatever offer is put on the table, but that since we're in a position to fund our own infrastructure projects, we can ensure that we put in place whatever mechanisms are appropriate in the specific cases to give value for money to our taxpayers. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Bunting. Senator Samuda.
Mr. President, I thank Leader of Opposition Business, Senator Bunting, for his support of the resolution before us. Just to make one point, he mentioned the comparison of apples and apples in the context of professional services. And, you know, as I said, better late than never, because that would have been identified, I think, over several decades across administrations, that this was the appropriate approach. But where we are now, on the back of the sacrifices that would have been made, has put us in a position to fund our projects in a way that we couldn't before. So there's an agreement in that space. But in the same vein, I think it's important, Mr. President, for colleagues to recall that in the discussions related to the Montego Bay bypass projects, that these two projects are not comparing apples and apples. There was no preparatory work done by any contractor in good faith with the expectation that they would have funded it on these stretches of roadway that we've identified. Whereas in the case of Montego Bay, there was expectation that there would have been international funding by way of loans, and preparatory work was done in good faith, expecting that financial transaction that no longer was necessary, that was done. So in the spirit of collaboration and partnership, considering we have had a very strong partnership with the government of China, and certainly with their company, we went the sole source method in that space. So it's not comparing apples and apples. But it is good that we have reached where we have reached today, Mr. President. We are now in the space to finance our own infrastructure development, and we're in the space to go to competitive tender to ensure that we get value for money and that our citizens get the maximum benefit from these projects. Mr. President, I now move that the motion, notice of which I gave earlier, be approved.
Members would have heard the question and, more importantly, heard the informative contribution by Minister Samuda and Senator Bunting. Those in favor? Those in favor? Against? Minister?
Mr. President, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
I should have heard the question. Those in favor? Against? Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. In the same vein, I also wish to start by acknowledging again the collaboration from colleagues in the opposition to allow us to table and take this important set of regulations today. I stand here to commence the debate of this Honourable Senate, on the regulations titled the Trust and Corporate Services Providers Licensing and Operations Regulations 2022. By way of background, Mr. President, this Honourable Senate may recall that the International Corporate and Trust Services Providers Act, which I refer to as the Act, was passed in both Houses of Parliament in 2017 and was assented on August 18, 2017. The Act was promulgated to facilitate the establishment of a regulatory framework within which providers of international corporate and trust services could operate. Another key reason for the promulgation of the Act was to prevent the use of trust and corporate services providers, wittingly or unwittingly, for the conduct of money laundering, terrorism financing, and the proliferation financing. This Honourable Senate may also recall the International Corporate and Trust Service Providers Change of Name and Amendment Act, which I will refer to, Mr. President, as the Amendment Act, which was passed in November 2021, amended the Principal Act and changed its name to the Trust and Corporate Services Providers Act. The Amendment Act, Mr. President, removed the distinction in treatment between international and domestic corporate and trust services providers by bringing domestic services providers under the ambit of the legislation and the extension of the regulatory and licensing regime to be established by the Trust and Corporate Services Providers Act. This amendment was necessary, Mr. President, as the Act only provided for the regulation of service providers who provided corporate and trust services to international entities. However, FATF, through its 40 recommendations, requires that countries implement measures to ensure that the operations of all corporate and trust service providers are not used to facilitate money laundering, terrorism financing, and the financing of proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. The Act, along with the Amendment Act, have, however, not been brought into effect, as these pieces of legislation were awaiting the development and promulgation of regulations, and so it is with pleasure, Mr. President, that I now submit the Trust and Corporate Services Providers Licensing and Operations Regulations 2022 for the consideration and debate in this Senate. These regulations, Mr. President, are being made pursuant to Section 47 of the Act. The Financial Services Commission, referred to in the Act as the Commission, has responsibility for the administration of the Act and is authorized by Section 47 to make regulations for such matters as may be expedient for the purposes of the Act, with the approval of the Minister responsible for finance and subject to affirmative resolution. Permit me, therefore, Mr. President, as I will now do a detailed presentation of the regulations. Regulation 1, Mr. President, sets out the title of the regulations, while Regulation 2, the interpretation section of these regulations, sets out the definitions of certain critical terms used throughout the regulations. Regulation 3 prescribes the documents and information which must be provided by an applicant for a license to provide trust, corporate, or trust and corporate services pursuant to Section 6 of the Act. It is to be noted that the documents and information required are indeed extensive. Mr. President, they are aimed at ensuring that fit and proper criteria are met and that the applicant has also met such financial requirements as are prescribed and has the relevant professional competence to provide these services. Included in these requirements at Regulation 3, subparagraph 1c, is a provision of a policies and procedures manual which would demonstrate that effective controls are to be implemented to protect licensees from the threat of money laundering, terrorism financing, proliferation financing, and other financial crimes in accordance with the provisions under the Proceeds of Crime Act, the Terrorism Prevention Act, the United Nations Security Council Resolutions Implementation Act, and their attendant regulations. Regulation 4, Mr. President, provides that the Commission is to be informed whenever there is a change in the documents or information of an applicant and that the date of such change no later than 5 days after such change has been made. Regulation 5, Mr. President, addresses the requirement for the establishment of a corporate governance framework for the licensee business as set out the matters which should be included in the framework, such as conflict of interest policy and policies and procedures and control mechanisms to prevent the inappropriate use of clients' monies. Regulation 6, importantly, provides for the appointment of an officer of the licensee to see to the implementation and monitoring of the corporate governance framework. Regulation 7, Mr. President, sets out matters relating to a change in the status of the licensee and the form and manner in which notices of such change should be given. This regulation sets out, in accordance with Section 12 of the Act, what constitutes a change in the status of the licensee and include inter alia any action which a licensee proposes to take which would result in a material change in its capital adequacy or solvency, and any change in the beneficial ownership of the licensee, as this will allow the Commission to, among other things, Mr. President, assess the fitness and propriety of such persons. Regulations 8 and 9 stipulate the requirements for the keeping of records by a licensed service provider pursuant to Section 16 of the Act, and includes the keeping of a register of beneficial owners of the clients to the licensee. It is to be noted, Mr. President, that Regulation 9, paragraph 3, creates an offence as a licensee who includes false or misleading information in the register of beneficial owners is liable on summary conviction in a parish court to a fine for a person other than an individual, and in the case of an individual to a fine or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 3 months. Regulation 10, Mr. President, provides that a licensee may outsource any of the services which the licensee provides. The licensee, however, must give the Commission 14 days' notice of this in writing and is mandated to adhere to certain requirements before outsourcing such services. This is important, Mr. President, so that the regulator may make an assessment to ensure that this outsourcing does not hamper its ability to supervise the licensee. Any sub-outsourcing of services without the written approval of the Commission is prohibited on a breach of the provisions of Regulation 10 and could result in fines or imprisonment or both. Pursuant to Regulation 11, Mr. President, a licensee is obligated to provide such documents and information, whether in a physical or electronic form, as may be requested by the Commission in relation to any customer or service provided by the licensee and within timelines specified by the Commission. Regulation 12, Mr. President, stipulates that a trust service provider who enters into a business relationship, a one-off transaction, or any other agreement with a business in the regulated sector is obligated to inform the business that the licensee is acting in the capacity as a trustee and to comply with the request from a business in the regulated sector for information on the beneficial owner and any individual referred to in any document relating to the trust. Regulation 13, Mr. President, provides that a licensee who breaches Regulations 11 or 12 commits an offence and is liable on summary conviction to pay a fine, if a company, or to a fine or imprisonment, or both in the case of an individual. Mr. President, to aid the Commission in carrying out its supervisory responsibilities, Regulation 14 provides for the filing of reports or records by the licensee in the form and manner to be determined by the Commission. Importantly also, Mr. President, Regulation 15 speaks to the audit of the accounts of the licensee by an independent auditor pursuant to Section 17 of the Act, with the audit to include a review of such matters as may be specified by the Commission by notice published in the Gazette. It also provides that a report provided to the Commission by an independent auditor is not a contravention of the auditor's professional obligation to secrecy. Regulation 16 prescribes how monies held by the licensee on behalf of the clients are to be kept and the procedures for disbursement of clients' monies. This is an important safeguard, Mr. President, which ensures, among other things, that all accounts are held in the joint names of the licensee and the client, and that the client's bank accounts are to be reconciled promptly by the service provider. Mr. President, Regulation 17 specifies that a service provider will be liable for any loss or depreciation in the value of trust property resulting from a breach, as well as for any profit which would have accrued to the trust property had there been no breach. Regulation 18 sets out the documents that are to be furnished with an application to register a principal representative of a licensee. These documents, Mr. President, are aimed at ensuring that fit and proper criteria are met by the prospective principal representative. Regulation 19, Mr. President, speaks to the requirement that all written notices of legal and other proceedings of a licensee required to be given pursuant to the Act are to be made in the form and manner to be determined by the Commission. Regulation 20, Mr. President, also states that where there will be a merger, takeover, or cessation of the operations of the business of a licensee, the written notice to be given to the Commission is to be in the form and manner determined by the Commission. Such prescribed forms will serve the purpose of allowing the Commission to fulfill the defined aims of the legislation. A licensee that intends to cease the operations of the business is to submit a written termination plan pursuant to guidelines issued under Section 46 of the Act, along with the notice. This will enable the Commission to be apprised of the arrangements that have been put in place for the transfer of clients' business to another service provider. Mr. President, Regulation 21 provides that the licensees are to have a professional indemnity insurance to cover the aggregate of at least 2 times the annual gross income or projected gross income of the licensee. Regulation 22 sets out the requirements for the licensee to file with the Commission on an annual basis a declaration of compliance in the time, form, and manner to be specified by the Commission. This, Mr. President, is a very important mechanism in the regulatory regime aimed at ensuring that all licensees are indeed compliant and are operating their businesses in conformity with the Act and these regulations. Regulation 23 makes provision for the establishment of a fair and timely mechanism for the receipt, recording, and handling of all consumer complaints by the licensee. Finally, Mr. President, As has been mentioned throughout the regulations, and the Commission may specify pursuant to Regulation 24, the form and manner in which an application, statement, notice, return, or any other document required to be filed with the Commission is to be made. Such notice shall be published in the Gazette. Mr. President, the affirmation of these regulations will allow an appointed day of notice to be gazetted to bring into effect the Trust and Corporate Services Providers Act, the International Corporate and Trust Services Providers Change of Name and Amendment Act, as well as these regulations, and will allow for the establishment operationally of the regulatory and licensing regime for corporate and trust services providers. This will also enable Jamaica to comply with the requirements of FATF for the regulation of trust and corporate services providers of both domestic and international clients. Mr. President, I now invite the support of the members of this Honourable Senate in affirming the Trust and Corporate Services Providers Licensing and Operations Regulations 2022.
Thank you very much, Senator Samuda. Senator Bunting, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, we've in this Parliament previously tracked the elephantine gestation period of this international corporate and trust service providers' effort starting from 2008 coming forward. And I then expressed skepticism on the initiative, which had promised tens of thousands of jobs, etc. But at least the work hasn't been wasted, as we've now adjusted and started to incorporate the domestic activity into the work originally done for the international corporate and trust service providers. But the pieces of legislation have come to us in a sort of hodgepodge way over many years, and it now becomes hard to keep track of it in a sort of coherent way. So there are some things that are not clear to me at this point, and I would ask, when the Minister finishes consulting, I would ask him to help us with this. Minister, I'd like you to hear this, because I'm going to ask you to, in your response, given that we have now incorporated, we have amended rather the Act to incorporate the domestic providers, will these regulations now apply to providers such as the Jamaica Stock Exchange or the Central Securities, Jamaica Central Securities Depository, the JCSD? Will it apply to the Companies Office? Will it apply to licensees under the FSC or BOJ Act, because they often provide custodial services or other administration of monies and financial assets, even though they may not be strictly registered as trustees or trust companies? Will it apply to attorneys? And I think I saw a reference to the Proceeds of Crime Act, and I know they have, the attorneys have, if I'm not mistaken, that matter I think is still being challenged in the courts, because an attempt was made, I think from my days as minister, to bring them under the ambit of the reporting requirements, etc., under the FATF, etc., the anti-money laundering and anti-terrorism financing legislation. You might be able to update us on the status of that. But I say that because if we're incorporating it in the domestic sector, then I'm hoping that we're doing it thoroughly and covering all the bases. The second point I want to ask you about, in terms of these regulations under clause 3.1J, for example, where this clause is outlined in the documents and information to be furnished on application for a license. And they are properly set out here, except the J now says any other documents and information that the Commission may, from time to time, specify in guidelines. So while the original Act required affirmative resolution by Parliament, what you're essentially doing with this is that it will only require it once. Because having put this clause in the first affirmative resolution, it means going forward, it will be entirely left to the discretion and the determination of the Commission without parliamentary approval. And I think that doesn't seem to me to be faithful to the intention of Parliament, which originally, to the law which was passed, which originally required these regulations to come to the approval, to come back to Parliament via affirmative resolution for approval. And the same applies to clause or section 9(1)K. Again, this is speaking to the register of beneficial owners and is outlining the following particulars in relation to each client. And again, after setting out what seem to be very reasonable requirements from A to K, the full name of the client, the date on which the individual became a beneficial owner, date of birth, nationality, and so on. Then we come to K, which again is a catch-all. Such other information as may be required by the Commission. So again, we give the Commission powers that will now be outside of the oversight of Parliament. And just say, for example, and I'm not saying that they would do this, any reasonable commission would do this, but suppose they started requiring the DNA profile of the owners of these accounts, or some other very intrusive information which the Parliament may not feel comfortable with the Commission acquiring. So I know we can't amend regulations, but I think it's still incumbent on me to point out that and ask you to consider that with these catch-all clauses, we are basically saying that Parliament will have the oversight once, the first time the regulations are brought, but thereafter there will be no need.
Can the regulation supersede the Act? The Act requires affirmative resolution. How can the regulation?
My colleague, Senator Brown, is pointing out that he wonders whether this may not be actually unlawful, because if the Act requires these regulations to be brought, and we're essentially giving power to the Commission to make additional regulations without coming back to Parliament, then we should be advised whether this may not be an overreach and may technically not be unlawful. And I assume that there is a representative of the Attorney General's department here that is being consulted with by the Minister and Senator Golding. The final point I would, and this is not a major issue, but it's sort of more a technical point, Minister. The clause 16D, which refers to client monies, and it speaks to a licensee shall implement a procedure whereby at least 2 officers of the licensee endorse the disbursement of client monies. Now, this language of endorsement is really more relevant to the era of checks and bills of exchange, where a physical signature was required for endorsement. I think today a more appropriate word would be approve, which would capture electronic approval, and which would be the much more likely eventuality given the whole move towards digital branches, remote locations, etc. And again, this may not be obvious to the average person, but for someone who worked in the financial sector for much of my career, I endorse, the word endorse is really coming from that era of bills of exchange and checks and physical documents. So I would suggest that approve would be a broader term that would cover both those who are still in the check and bills of exchange era and those who are operating entirely in the digital approval era. So I hope those suggestions you will find reasonable and maybe even helpful in terms of looking again, considering again some elements of the regulations. Overall, we're in support of the regulations. I'm just saying, I think if you look at those, they might help to tighten it up and in fact increase the effectiveness and the intention, further the intention of the regulations.
Mr. President, I'd just like a second to.
You
want some time? Yes, I'd like 2 minutes. 5 minutes if you could allow, President.
want me to rise for 5 minutes?
Yes, President.
The sitting of the Senate is therefore suspended for 10 minutes to give you the opportunity to take some instructions.
People always say government must be held accountable. But is whose job to keep government accountable? And what that really mean? Well, you see, when ministers and public officials have to provide answers for decisions made and can face consequences for those actions and decisions, that means they're being held accountable. Keeping government accountable is a key responsibility of our elected representatives, and the Parliament provides special tools or mechanisms just for this. As citizens, we need to understand how they work so we can play our part to ensure that the members of Parliament we elect are using the tools and doing their job well. Here are 4 of the primary tools you should understand and talk to your MP about. Tool number 1, Ministers' Statements. To effectively monitor the government, MPs need to stay informed. Every Tuesday when Parliament sits, different cabinet ministers are scheduled to give an update on decisions they're making on our behalf. These updates are called Statements by Ministers. They cover a wide range of national issues that other MPs, media, and citizens may have questions about and wish to examine further. That brings us to tool number 2. What you do when you want information? You ask questions, and that's why we have question time. Both opposition and government MPs can submit questions to the Prime Minister or Cabinet Ministers for details on, for example, how a contract was awarded or expenditure to purchase tablets for schools. So if you ever have a question for a government minister, try asking through your MP. After all, that's why they're your political representatives. They should represent your questions and concerns to the government. Tool number 3, Parliamentary Debates. When cabinet ministers present the government's proposals for new policies, laws and programs, parliamentary debates allow both opposition and government MPs to air concerns, make suggestions and endorse proposals. If you ever watch those debates, you know they can get a little fiery. But the debate is important as it informs decisions and continues until a vote is taken on the way forward. Then we have tool number 4, Parliamentary Committees. The general sittings of Parliament are not always sufficient for detailed examination of government work. So oversight committees are formed using government and opposition members to do just that. Some committees like the PAC and the PAAC are in place for an entire parliamentary term. Their job is to monitor the use of public funds to find ways to increase value and efficiency while reducing waste and corruption. Cabinet and state ministers are not appointed to oversight committees since they are a part of the government. Some committees are formed when a need arises. For example, joint select committees are formed to review draft policies or legislation or to probe other matters of serious national importance. Members of these committees are both opposition and government MPs and senators, and these committees will usually invite citizens to share their opinions, concerns, and recommendations. So there you have it, 4 accountability tools of Parliament that are used to make sure government run right. Visit jampja.org to find contact information for your MP. Invite them to meet with the community so they can better represent your issues and concerns in Parliament and keep government accountable. Get involved and let's make Jamaica land we love, Jamaica land we own, and Jamaica land we run well. A message from the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, funded by the European Union and the Inter-American Development Bank in partnership with the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica.
Jamaica is a beautiful place. Our people have a beautiful spirit, but we are too aggressive, and the way we interact with our friends and neighbors, I genuinely believe that we have the capacity to deal with this problem of violence. But it's going to take all of us. It's going to take every organized group of Jamaicans that we fundamentally reject violence. Violence has no place in a modern society.
Tell me something. How much time you ever hear the government announce a project and wonder why they must spend millions on this and not on that? Well, if you think there's nothing you can do about how your money is spent, think again. Jamaica's budget is more than just numbers. It reveals our biggest problems and goals, our plans to fix them, and what to prioritize. We can even call it a promise book of what will be done to improve our lives. Now, let's talk about the 4 stages of the budget cycle so we can understand how it works and get involved. Stage 1, planning and review. The Ministry of Finance sends out a budget call to every ministry, which outlines the priorities and constraints to guide how those ministries prepare their budget. After ministries submit their drafts, the Finance Ministry reviews, compiles, and sends them to Cabinet for review and approval. Stage 2, parliamentary debate and approval. The Finance Minister tables all budget documents in the House of Representatives. The Standing Finance Committee, which is all 63 MPs, sits to examine the budget documents, and each minister presents their budget and answers concerns the committee has. The committee's report is then tabled in the House, followed by the estimated expenditure, which is tabled as legislation called the Appropriations Bill. That's right, the budget of Jamaica is law. The budget debate formally opens. We have presentations from the Minister of Finance, the Prime Minister, Opposition Leader, and the Shadow Finance Minister. After their presentations, our MPs vote for or against approval. Like all legislation, it goes to the Senate for their approval and then to the Governor General for his royal assent. No later than March 31st, end of the financial year. Stage 3, implementation. The new financial year begins and approved budgets are sent to ministries. Collecting taxes, borrowing loans, and receiving grants begin. And so does the spending. Stage 4, budget oversight. Now, this is where citizens don't need permission to get involved. Throughout the year, operations and spending are assessed by internal auditors and the Auditor General's department that makes sure public entities are compliant with laws and that their financial reports are accurate. All Auditor General reports are submitted to our Parliament's Public Accounts Committee for review and cross-examination of public officials. The Ministry of Finance, Integrity Commission, and MOCA also monitor government spending to guard against poor financial management and corruption. It is our job to review these reports, check the findings in the newspaper, and look up if breaches are fixed at jampja.org. If not, ask your MP what he or she has done to ensure public officials are held to account. No more 9-day wonders. So, did the government follow through on their spending and investment promises last year? What promises will next year's budget have? How will they affect you, and how can you ensure that you get what is promised? For access to the national budget, check out JAMP's easy digital version and contact info for your MP at jampja.org. Then link your MP and see what progress is being made throughout the entire budget cycle. Support JAMP. Let's do our job to make Jamaica land we love, Jamaica land we own, and Jamaica land we run well. A message from the Jamaica Accountability Meter Portal, funded by the European Union in partnership with the Private Sector Organization of Jamaica.
A major area in high school for me was IT and EDPM. I did that for 2 years, and from then I realized that there was a drive for more of technology. So I decided to take this step.
Crime is Jamaica's #1 threat. As we stay apart while working together to fight COVID-19, we must all live good and unite against crime and violence in Jamaica. Live good means talk it out, don't fight it out. We must live good to build a safe Jamaica. Stay home, stay safe, live good.
We work to make communities safer by essentially looking at the structures in the community that contribute greatest to social capital building. Try to reinforce, build, and establish those structures in a way that the community can sustain their own safety and own their own peace. When we say, for instance, we're doing a zinc fence removal program, what we're really doing is improving the line of sight if you're on the street.
Senator Bunting for his contribution and for the points raised. I think they're definitely worthy of deep consideration.
Sorry, Senator Samuda, you want to just inform the clerk or the deputy clerk?
Sure,
that we need. Just hold on a minute, please. You can continue, Senator Samuda.
Thank you, Mr. President. There were three main issues raised from the opposition side and one from the government side, though not in the debate. I think the easier one is the final one you raised, which was related to 16D, which was the approved versus endorsement. I agree, but we are where we are. I think it's something that we'll have to look at for future amendments, and it does. I think that comment does reflect where we should be heading with our legislation and regulations of this nature. If it wasn't regulations and we could amend it, I would definitely accept the amendment. But we are where we are. As it relates to the second point that was raised was related to Section 31J and 91K, which was felt to be open-ended. It's not as open-ended as appeared if read in isolation of the rest of the bill. The reading and the feeling from the reading and review, even when I'd asked the questions before, was that it was limited to the intent of that particular subsection. So it's not open-ended where it has to be related to one of the other documents. So in a sense, if you have a change in the type of ID, I mean, we're at a stage now globally where technological advancements are happening at a rate that we never contemplated. There are types of documents that we may not be able to anticipate existing next year or the year after, where it would be inefficient to just add a type of document or a type of ID or a type of space to be coming back to the Parliament in that sort of manner. It doesn't change the intent of the legislation. That's not my reading of it, and that's not the legal advice. As it related now to the first point that Senator Bunting had raised, and how these regulations now captured local participants in the space. To list what is actually captured in this space. The stock exchange is not. JCSD is. The company's office is not because it is a regulator versus an entity in the same sort of space. It does capture the middle facilitators who interact with the company's office. Licensees of FSC are already captured in the FSC provisions, but particular businesses that are licensed and do interact with BOJ are caught in this space. Attorneys are indeed caught. And to your final point that was raised, the matter is still before the courts, I understand, headed to the Privy Council, so there's not much to say about that at this juncture. But Mr. President, what I think is particularly important for colleagues and for any persons listening at home or otherwise to understand is that the FATF recommendations have to be taken by small island developing states for us to be considered compliant and to be considered good actors in the global financial architecture. It is where the world is going to deal with issues of terrorism and money laundering, and this is a step in the right direction for Jamaica. It means that Jamaica will be seen as a good actor on the international stage as it relates to matters of finance, and it is important for Jamaica's good standing so that we can continue to attract particular volumes and types of FDI. Mr. President, with that said, I now move that the motion, notice of which I gave earlier, be approved.
Thank you, Minister. Members would have heard the enlightened presentation by Minister Samuda. And of course, supported by Senator Bunting, ably, I might add. The question is that the motion be approved. Those in favor? Against? Minister?
President, it is not the intention to conduct any more business today, but I do know there are two.
I'm sorry. I didn't want the deputy clerk to interrupt you earlier, but there is an issue that has to be dealt with before you move to the next aspect of the matter. I think you're moving for the recommittal
of notices of motions.
The question is that the question of notices of motions given orally be recommitted. Those in favor? Against? Senator Samuda.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate I will move, be it resolved with reference to the resolution approved by this Honourable Senate on the 22nd day of April 2022, amending the composition of the Special Select Committee appointed to sit jointly with a similar committee appointed by the House of Representatives to conduct a statutory review of the Cybercrimes Act, that the motion be amended by inserting the words notwithstanding Standing Order 73 immediately before the words the name Shireen Golding Campbell. The motion as amended would read as follows. Be it resolved with reference to the resolution approved by this Honourable Senate on the 15th day of January 2021, appointing a Special Select Committee to sit jointly with a similar committee appointed by the House of Representatives to conduct the statutory review of the Cybercrimes Act, that notwithstanding Standing Order 73, the name Shireen Golding Campbell be added thereto. Mr. President, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
You may just point out for the members who are uncertain that the issue relates, Standing Order 73 relates to the number of persons who may sit on a committee. So thank you very much, Minister. I ask for the recommittal of public business.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
That's the question. Those in favor? Against?
Mr. President, I now move that the motion, notice of which I gave earlier, be approved.
Those in favor? Against? Yes. Saying that there are two motions on the adjournment, I believe.
Yes, President. And I would ask Senator Campbell Rodriguez to take the first.
No problem. But just before I do that, members of the Senate, it is with great pleasure that I ask you to join me in welcoming His Excellency Fermin Quinones Sanchez, the new ambassador from the Republic of Cuba. To Jamaica, who is seated in the gallery. His Excellency, this is His Excellency's first visit to our Parliament, and he's here today to pay a courtesy call on the Speaker and myself, and of course, to pay his respects to the members of this Honourable Senate. Ambassador Sanchez is a career diplomat and has served in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Cuba since 1998. His Excellency follows the footsteps of Ambassador Ines Flores Fernandez, who did much to further relations between Jamaica and Cuba, and in particular between the National Assembly of the People's Congress there and the Parliament of Jamaica. We are sure that His Excellency Your Excellency that during your tenure you will continue to build on the firm foundation of your predecessors, and that the relationship between Jamaica and Cuba will continue to grow in strength to strength. Welcome to Jamaica and welcome to the Parliament. Senator Campbell Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, Mr. President, thank you. I once heard someone say that once they enter the National Stadium in Jamaica, they are overcome with a certain level of happiness like they have nowhere else. And over the last 2 weeks, our National Stadium has been graced with nothing short of jubilation and joy. So I thought it important to just rise and speak a little about the Carifta Games as well as the Boys and Girls Champs recently held. Mr. President, just to give a little historical background, in 1972, when we were making the transition as a region from Carifta to CARICOM, the first Carifta Games were inaugurated. And while the objectives of Carifta itself was to enhance relations between English-speaking countries of the region, the vision of the Carifta Games included making it much wider to include the Dutch and French Antilles. They were included in this festival of athletes, which is held annually and sees participation from a wide cross-section of junior athletes. Today, Mr. President, the Carifta Games is run entirely by the IAAF rules, and it is regarded as one of the premier global athletic staging anywhere in the world. Many careers move from Carifta to the next level following their performances there. Within the Jamaican context, young athletes are often seen at Boys and Girls Champs, then observed closer at the Carifta Games, where they are recruited for universities and/or professional careers. The likes of Usain Bolt and Veronica Campbell-Brown are products of the Carifta Games. Now, Mr. President, a week prior to the Carifta Games, Kingston also hosted the annual Boys and Girls Champs, which is, in my mind and in the minds of many of my colleagues, the grounds at which Jamaican track and field continues to thrive. No, I never said Kingston College. Never said so. Never said that. What a few days of nothing short of glory and amazement we had in that national stadium. Mr. President, I use this moment to praise the athletes and their coaches and the schools they attend. This praise goes also for Carifta, for both Carifta and boys and girls champs. In addition, I thank all these athletes for providing hope, enjoyment, and examples of unity, as was shown by the Jamaica Carifta 4x100 under-20 girls team that won that magical race. Those 4 young ladies came from 2 different high schools, but worked together to not just win, but to break the world record. There's a lesson in there somewhere, I'm sure. Mr. President, sometimes when we think of Carifta, we think of track and field and overlook our swimmers. It is important to remember that 64 of the 156 medal haul are from our swimmers. I want to especially highlight the work and dedication of our swimmers from the western end of the island who train without proper facilities. What a dedicated set of youngsters we have in these athletes. Mr. President, I know as a fact that dialogue among relevant stakeholders is ongoing to change the situation for our swimmers, especially those from the West. So we wait and we know that this will happen. In addition to the athletes and their coaches, Mr. President, I take the opportunity to thank the parents, the J3As, the Jamaica Swimming Association, the team managing the national stadiums, all governing bodies involved, and everyone else involved in making these 2 events what they are. And Mr. President, it's also important for us to highlight those athletes who went through boys and girls champs and Carifta and came out to support the budding athletes this year. Shelley and Fraser was there. Sharika was there. Usain was there. Natoya Gould, they were there to support. Elaine was there to support and to encourage the new athletes. And Ransford says he was there as well. And Don, yes, who was us? Mr. President, I think it is also important to highlight that those events could not happen without sponsors. Thank you to all the sponsors and our own Senator Don Webby that heads Grace Foods. They were the main sponsors for boys and girls champs, and what an event that was. I also must take the opportunity. I try not to speak on behalf of other people, but I want to speak on behalf of our very own mayor of the KSAC of Kingston, who has asked me to highlight that the Kingston and St. Andrew Corporation was proud and honored to host both the boys and girls champs that happens here annually and the Carifta Games, which comes to Jamaica once every few years. And the mayor wants me to highlight that they look forward to doing both events again in the near future. Mr. President, it took an entire village to deliver, and that village includes so many more persons than those who I've mentioned before, because I have, of course, not yet mentioned the ministry responsibility for sports and the minister, Olivia Babsy-Grange, that leads that team, because we know the work that that team puts in to make this all happen. And of course, the security forces of Jamaica, both the private and the Jamaica Constabulary Force. They were out in numbers and they ensured that things worked smoothly. I see my colleague, Senator Morris on the other side, Gabriella, not Floyd. I see you move your head, Floyd. You must have seen me pointing over there. She was there in the stadium. I saw her on the days, and we had a whale of a time. So you know the work that went in by the different security forces to make that happen. And through you, Mr. President, I recommend to my Senate colleagues that we should continue to love and support our Jamaican sports prowess in whatever way possible. To our athletes, once again, thank you for all you do for yourselves, your schools, your family, and ultimately for Jamaica. if it please. Oh, let me just point out real quickly, no, it doesn't have to do with KC, that for the athletics, for the track and field section, Mr. President, Jamaica got 45 gold medals, 29 silver medals, and 18 bronze medals. So we had 92 points. The team that came second in points only had 23 points. That was Trinidad and Tobago. So it shows the prowess of Jamaican track and field in the region. And on the global stage. And in swimming, where we had 64 medals, we were second in point standing. And again, we need to really, really support our athletes, because what they have done, and especially the athletes from the West, I want to again say thank you to each and every one of them.
Thank you very much, Senator Campbell Rodriguez. Senator Morris, Gabriel Morris.
Oh no. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, colleagues. I feel so tall. Wow. It would be remiss of me not to join with my colleague on the other side in offering commendations to our athletes who in the past few weeks have displayed such determination, such grit, such talent. And I believe that we can all say that we're extremely proud. Mr. President, it's been an exciting few weeks in the world of sports. And Senator Rodriguez Campbell mentioned that, we were out at the stadium. And I tell you, from Champs, where we saw somewhat of a return to normalcy, not quite there yet, but it was a feat to behold. And we saw the young people coming, not just from the corporate area, but I have to make special mention of those schools, non-traditional schools also, who came out from rural Jamaica and really, really showed up. And while I didn't have a school at Champs, I was still able to cheer for so many Western schools who were so well represented. But colleagues, please allow me to extend commendations to the winners, to those who emerged as the winners of Champs. Kingston College, Senator Braham, yes, that was your cue. And also Edwin Allen, who produced some superb performances. I also want to specially commend all the other students, all the other athletes who came out and gave it their all, as well as their coaches, their parents. Did you all see the Clayton twins' parents? They showed up for the kids, and it was really beautiful. I also want to extend commendations to the ISA team, to the officials, and to the sponsors who saw it fit to invest in the talent of our young people. So, Champs happened, and it was amazing. But then we had Carifta, and we were back again to witness the dominance, that was displayed out there as we saw the Caribbean coming together to show its prowess on the track and on the field. And while we're Jamaicans and we know that, we always want to say that we are the best, it was good to see we are the best. We are the best. But it was also good to see other Caribbean nations coming together to celebrate what is the Caribbean, the skill and the talent that we possess. And so at the 49th staging of the CRIFTA Games, which we were pleased to host, Mr. Mayor, we were pleased to host it this year, and I hope that too, in coming years, we'll be able to host not just another CRIFTA, but other meets, because we see the benefit of bringing sporting events to Jamaica, of hosting them, the life that it can inject into the economy. And so we hope that this is something that will continue to happen. But I want to make special mention, and I think my colleague Senator mentioned it, of some of the athletes that stood out. We saw the under-20 4x1 relay. They shattered the record, both the boys and the girls. And there was also a record that was broken by discus, Deonja Shaw. She produced some tremendous results, and I want to especially commend them for their performance. And swimmers also broke a record. There we go. So many records were broken. Just a testament of the talent that was present at the games. And so we are blessed with talent and also expertise that allows us as a country to build and maintain a thriving sport dynasty. And we can all conclude that our athletes are simply the best. And I want to publicly commend their stellar performance. But taking it off the track for just a little bit, I also want to mention the reggae girls who just a few days ago, delivered a sterling victory in their campaign to the World Cup. And I want to say hats off to the girls because they continue to deliver and show up for Jamaica. Don't put words in my mouth. I also want to make mention too of our hockey team, our senior male and female hockey team, who recently competed in Bermuda for the CAC qualifiers. Our men have qualified for the CAC competition next year, and our women placed third. I also want to commend, a lot of things happened, and we have to big them up. Our young tennis players who participated in the Davis Cup, they did tremendously well, going up against a superpower like Greece. They displayed their talent, and we say hats off to them. So we see that there is no lack of talent that exists. And we welcome the growth in sport. We welcome the rejuvenation of sport, because we know that the COVID pandemic did in fact take a toll on the industry. And so to see spectators out in the stands was something that really brought joy to my heart, because I know that so many people were able to benefit from a revenue perspective, having that return of spectators. So we saw persons being able to sell, we saw, the officials who were able to get back to work, and it was a beautiful thing, and we hope that that will continue. And I want to use this moment to encourage members of the public to also be safe. Remember, COVID's still a keep. We want them to be safe so that we can continue and have more events of this nature so that the industry can continue to grow and thrive. The final thing that I want to say, Mr. President, because I promised that I wouldn't be long, and not because Mr. President isn't in the seat, I won't misbehave. So I want to say that there's a great need for support. We have the talent. We have the skills. We have the human resource. They're there. They want to participate. But we need more support. The SDF does its bit. The ministry does its bit. But we need our athletes to have everything in place that they need to perform at optimum. And so I want to use this opportunity to even join the minister in making a public plea for more support of our athletes. We need our corporate companies. We need Jamaicans in the diaspora. We need Jamaicans in the wider public to come together and see that Jamaica is a powerhouse. But it takes all of us to ensure that the industry can grow and thrive and our athletes can put their best foot forward. And so I close by saying that we can only conclude, based on the performances of last weekend and the weekend before, that Jamaica will be dominant for a long, 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 long time. But it takes all of us putting hearts and hands together to continue to support our young athletes, to continue to ensure that they're at their best and doing their best. And I want to close by just saying again, thank you for your contribution to Jamaica, to your schools, to your communities, to all the people who are looking to you. You have done well, and we're tremendously proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gabriel Morris.
Mr. President, so the second matter on the motion for adjournment, if I could get the lectern, please. Behave, please. Thank you, Mr. President. This is related to the second matter on the motion of adjournment, which is related to the fact that today, April 22nd, is indeed Earth Day. It is a day that was first celebrated in 1970. It was created with the recognition that human activity was having a deleterious effect and significant impact on our environment, and that this impact would eventually have a very negative impact on us and our future. The theme this year is investing in our planet. And it is important that we accept and understand that environmental protection, environmental restoration, efforts put into climate change mitigation and adaptation are indeed an investment in our future. It is an investment that I've often said and firmly believe is one that requires political maturity and working across the aisle. It's a difficult discussion, Mr. President, but it's a discussion that today more than other days is one that we must have. I firmly believe, as the Prime Minister would have stated in his budget presentation again, that any sustainable, and that rather, environment and economic growth, sustainable economic growth, cannot come on the back of environmental degradation. And inclusive prosperity cannot be steeped in pollution. Now, I think we all generally agree with that. But as you will find, and all governments have this challenge, not just Jamaica, or not just countries that are SIDS, certainly democratic countries have this particular challenge. We have short-term economic expectations of our people. They have medium and long-term expectations also, but because of the nature of our democracy, where you're locked into a 4 or 5 year cycle, depending on where you are, governments often are put in a compromising position, or in a difficult position rather, to make short-term economic decisions
versus long-term sustainable decisions. And that is the basis of why I say it requires a particular political maturity if we're to face the enormous challenges that we do face from an environmental standpoint. Now, certainly when we would have listened to the contributions of colleague Senators Campbell Rodriguez and Gabriela Morris, it spoke to the prowess, the strength, the talent of our people. It's not just in sports. In fact, the scale of the problems that we do face, I believe we have the talent, the knowledge, and the skill, and the resolve to face them head-on, certainly from the Jamaican perspective. So taking the international theme of investing in our planet, I think it's important for us to discuss and to consider how we go forward investing in our part of the planet, in our rock, in our environmental protection, so that indeed we are able to deal with the fact that the climate has changed. We're able to restore what we have degraded over the last 50 to 100 years, depending on which metric you want to review, and that we work together to achieve restoration and protection of our natural resources, which are indeed what we have been gifted by God. And it would be a terrible travesty for us to not do what we must for our children and our grandchildren. Just to, and I won't be terribly long this afternoon, but just to ask colleagues to consider it in the context that there are three major things that we all have to put our minds to. One is the greening of the economy. A lot of that is around how do you transition to low carbon or net neutrality, as they would call it, by changing your energy mix. That's an economic decision that has major political implications. So that's something that colleagues need to put their mind to. And it's something that we are working towards. We've already articulated that our ambition for Jamaica is to have 50% of our energy source coming from renewables. And that is considering the fact that we expect to grow significantly as a nation, so we expect to need more energy. So that energy need and the development and the investment required to really build that amount of renewable sources is going to be significant and is going to take a lot of work. The other consideration has to be, how are we going to approach the issue of protection? The idea of taking an asset that someone has purchased out of the development pool is something that we have to discuss as a parliament. Many persons would have purchased or inherited or however they would have acquired particular parts of land that through our analysis now, we now know is too ecologically sensitive for development. That is something we're going to have to discuss as time goes by. But on a day like Earth Day, it's a good day to celebrate some of the gains that would have been made. Earlier this year, we would have announced the completion of the protection, the legal protection for the Black River Morass area, which is something I'm particularly proud of. And indeed, the completion of the legal protection for over 78,000 hectares of the cockpit country, something that languished for over 50 years. But that takes us only to 22%, and our targets and ambition is above 30%. So it's going to take, again, the political maturity to deal with the protection of areas such as the Pedro Keys, which function as a center of livelihood for many Jamaicans. So we have to discuss how we manage that, as well as the 16 areas that the Prime Minister would have announced will form a part of the protected space as ecologically sensitive areas. The third issue that I would like colleagues to consider on Earth Day is how we're going to deal with our solid waste. And that's going to require significant investment, but it's also going to require significant resolve. The issues around, one of the buzzwords, and you'd have heard it coming out of the resolution passed at UNIA in Kenya, I think a little over a month ago. Globe has decided that plastic pollution has gone too far. The resolution passed called for the establishment of an INC, an International Negotiating Committee, to develop a global treaty that would have a legally binding global treaty to deal with the issue of plastic pollution. We will have to work across the aisle with our private sector partners to get Jamaica ready. The pattern of consumption in terms of how we consume plastic will not be the same in 2030, based on how I see this resolution developing and how I expect this treaty to develop. So we have to ready our manufacturers so that we don't have the fallout in income that comes to them as businesses that then creates a fallout in employment. There's a lot of work to do, and I look forward to working with my colleague on the other side to ensure that you do display the political maturity that we have in the past on issues such as the overhaul of our financial architecture, certainly through the IMF program. But I believe this will need the same level of collaboration and maturity. The last point I'll make, Mr. President, is that we need to be very clear, colleagues. The climate has changed. It's not a future concept that we're discussing. What we're concerned about is the rate of continued change. But even with the change that has already happened, our weather patterns are significantly different. So our investments have to take into consideration the type of infrastructure and the resilience required and the capacity of said infrastructure. And we are in a race against time. That would have been on display just this week with the rains in St. James. And the rains then would have been very similar to the intensity and the volume from November 2017. And we saw what would have happened then, and we saw what would have happened this week. 50 years ago, persons couldn't contemplate that sort of volume of rain in that sort of period of time. We saw it recently in Port Marion in the northeast end of the island, and unfortunately, we will see more of it. So we are in a race against time. And the costs of us not winning that race in the way we've won at Carifta and the way that we've seen our young boys and girls perform and win at Boys and Girls Champs is going to be human lives. So this political maturity is not some far-off concept that doesn't have implications. It's going to literally affect all of us. And that effect and that cost, I think, is going to be too high to pay. And I wish to use the opportunity on behalf of Acting President Sinclair and indeed, I'm sure, colleague Senator Denise Allen and all of us, to extend condolences to the family of young Janelle Walters. It is too much to consider what that family is going through, and we indeed continue to pray and add our well wishes to the family, praying against odds that indeed his grandmother will indeed be found safe and sound. We know the odds are against us, but we pray for her safe return, and we pray for the solace of that family. The costs will mount if we don't act. And today on Earth Day, I think it'd be very important for us to recommit to taking the actions that are necessary, understanding that they are expensive, but that the price of not taking these actions is way more expensive. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Minister Samuda. Ministers.
Thank you.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr.
Sophia
President.
Fraser-Beans.
Mr. President, I thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. Mr. President, this morning I had the opportunity and perhaps a teachable moment for the persons in attendance, because with the help of the Forestry Department, and I publicly want to just thank them for the work that they have been doing in Senator Samuda, the government's initiative for 3 million trees in 3 years, and Senator Samuda has informed me that we have gone 1/3 of that. So we are well on track, and the opposition stands in full support to play its part. But I really want to commend the forestry, because every time we have called upon them, we being the opposition have called upon them, they have answered the call and answered it professionally. But with their help this morning, I was able to distribute some trees to some of the leaders in my organization. And there are two things that came out of that, sir. One was the fact that I thought it was important that as leaders, we don't just pay lip service to environmental protection or just do something fancy on Earth Day, but in a very real way, we show our commitment to the protection and the preservation of the earth through planting trees and continuing the effort of the Forestry Department. But the teachable thing for me was that the location that we had the ceremony did not have a shelter. I didn't anticipate it to be that sunny. And I'll tell you, Mr. President, that it was hot. And I apologized to them because of the heat, but I said to them, just think about this. Think about a country where you live that is 10 times this hot. A country where you live, where your children are growing up, that has no trees. And if that is not the country that you want to exist in, then you have an opportunity today to make the change. And Mr. President, I said that to them and I charged them, and I'm charging my colleagues and anyone else who's listening, that on this Earth Day, more than 40 years ago it started, let us today, the 60th year of our independence, commit that we are going to make the change today. And that change comes about by way of the investment. As the theme says, invest in our planet. We only have one planet, planet Earth. Minister said time is running out. I said, Minister, time is up. So what we have to do, each and every one, whatever color you support, and I am very happy this morning to be wearing my teal in support of Earth Day. But whichever color you support, that we have to commit to doing that. We have to commit to that investment. We have to commit to invest in our garbage disposal. Only this week, I took the opportunity, my sons are on Easter holiday, and I took the opportunity to take a group of children, including my sons, to downtown. The mayor has left, downtown Kingston. Some of them went to West Street by the mural, and we have some lovely photos of Senator Braham to show, but I digress. But after our tour of the museum, we went to the Bank of Jamaica by the waterfront, and the boys had a great time. But one of them said, Mommy or Auntie, why you have so much things in the water? The plastic plates, the straws, the cups, all the debris you can think of at our prime waterfront location. So we have to start thinking about how we're going to treat our garbage. So we have to invest individually in a commitment to start practicing proper garbage disposal and sorting, and Minister Samuda and I have spoken about that. But generally, as a country, we have to invest in making the resources available for garbage disposal. We have to invest in education. Education not just about what is happening now in terms of climate change, but education about the role each and every one of us can play. We have been working with some children because we believe that a little child shall lead them. And in school, Senator Rodriguez, you remember the song that we used to sing, Bits of Paper Lie on the Ground. We have to go back there where we recreate that consciousness in all Jamaicans that not littered up Jamaica. But we also have to invest in tree planting. And when I say tree planting, I want to broaden it a bit, because people think that you have to have big land to do tree planting. Minister Samuda will tell us that with the help of the Ministry of Agriculture and the Forestry Department, you can have your miniature tree. So even if you live in an apartment complex, you can have your tree in a container. So we all have to do that, and we know the effect that trees have in terms of carbon dioxide and oxygen and how it balances and cleans the environment. We have to invest in sustainable agricultural practices for food security. There is no doubt that climate change has brought about a negative effect or negative impact on our agriculture and thereby affecting our food security. We have to start learning to feed ourselves by practicing sustainable agriculture. And Mr. President, we have to really have that kind of hard discussion that Minister Samuda spoke about, which crosses the aisle and include all stakeholders about the way forward. Because we're going to have to abandon some of our practices now that brings about economic gain. Because it brings about economic gains, but the expense to the environment is just not worth it. And we're going to have that discussion, because it is going to include retooling our workforce. It's going to include finding new and innovative economic activities to ensure that our unemployment rate continues to trend down. We're going to have that kind of hard discussion. And the opposition stands ready to sit at the table to make its contribution. And finally, Mr. President, we have to invest in having robust laws that are enforced. It can't be that our environment is managed by laws that are 20 and 30 years old. I will not say further because Minister Samuda and I have spoken about it, and we will continue our discussion. But I believe that investing in robust, modern laws and enforcing those laws to protect our environment is going to be important. Mr. President, in closing, I want to say that I do join with my colleagues and indeed all Jamaica in saluting our athletes. But I'm very happy that this particular item is placed as the last item before adjournment, because it is a moment for us to really contemplate the kind of Jamaica and the kind of world we want. It is an opportunity for us to take a sober approach into the weekend as we think about all that has happened in the past, all that has happened only this week, the loss of lives, the children who are impacted because they can't go to school because of flooding, the landslide. Only this morning I saw someone who had to rush to the country to deal with a landslide issue. We think about the destruction to our infrastructure and, of course, the loss of lives. And if these things are not sufficient to wake us up, I'm not sure what is. But certainly on my part, I am fully awoke, and we stand in full support of the initiatives of the government to work to protect our environment. And this is a commitment that we're making on Earth Day, and we will put action to our commitment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Fraser-Binns. Minister.
President, I think we've had a good day. But I don't believe that's necessary. But no, I don't think so. But I do ask for an adjournment of the sitting for a date to be fixed.
Well, you have heard the question. Those in favor? Those against, the ayes have it. The Senate stands adjourned for a date to be fixed. Thank you.
Coding and programming share the same language, so I got more interested because of programming. Because a couple of years ago I did wanted to do programming at VTDI.
Here is a special parenting message brought to you by the National Family Planning Board, 5 Sylvan Avenue, Kingston 5.